My first exposure to things French wasn't actually France, it was French Canada. And although I entered into it through the language, I quickly learned that there were lots of great things to learn about the food too. This is my tribute to French Canada. Tourtiere, which is a meat pie made a special way. Blueberry Grumble, which is my favorite form of crumble, with blueberries inside and almonds and oats on top. Split pea soup or soupe au pois with a ham hock. Maple Mousse, which is light and airy but very intensely mapley still. And Ployes, thin buckwheat pancakes a bit like blinis. These are traditional French recipes that have stood the test of time in a whole new world. My first French-Canadian dish is tourtiere, or what the Acadians call pâté. It's a meat pie, very savory filling. It tastes so good, I couldn't believe it the first time I made it because it's so simple to make. I need pastry first, so I'm using 3.5 cups of flour. A teaspoon of salt, 1.5 cups of butter. I'm cutting the butter in pieces so it's easier to pinch. I've got this all broken up into crumbs. See how it just gets flaky like that? And I'm making a well. I'm using 2 eggs. I want quite a sturdy pastry because it's going to wrap meat. And I need some cold water. I'll just mix the eggs and then just a few tablespoons, not too much. I can add a little bit in a minute. And then just whisking from the well inwards, drawing the flour in, whiz it until it holds together without over mixing because then it gets tough. And then just gather the dough into a ball. This is enough for 2 tourtières. I'm just going to let the dough chill because it's easier to roll out that way. Just going to pat it into a rectangle because that's how I'm going to roll it out. Will give me a head start. Now for the filling, I have 2 kinds of meat. And this is very typical of lots of French recipes, even now, in France and in Canada, to mix up meats because it gives more flavor. A pound of pork and a pound of beef, and I'm only going to use 1/2 pound of beef to the pork. Just break the meat into the pan. 1/2 pound of ground beef. Now this is the peculiar thing about this recipe, that instead of frying the meat, you actually pour water on it. And this keeps it from clumping. It keeps it much more tender when it's done. Add the onion right to the meat. Now, these are very old-fashioned flavorings. Cloves, but just a pinch. And the most important ingredient is summer savory. And just 1 teaspoon in this gives it its own special character. I'm just going to stir it around a little bit. It needs about 20 minutes until it's done. Whew. It's in a big hurry. Now look at how this gets all nice and crumbly instead of getting dense and hard. I'm just adding a few tablespoons of breadcrumbs that will hold it all together. This pastry is nice and firm. Now I'm actually just going to turn this off while I roll it out. And I want it a bit cool because I don't want it melting my pastry. I need a hot oven because the meat is cooked. Say 425, 450. And really all that has to cook is the pastry, and you want it to set quite quickly around so it doesn't slump too much. Smells great. A little pepper though, and salt. Make a line down the center. Now just fold up the ends over the meat and then the sides so that they overlap. Now I just want to try to flip it because I want it seam side down. Oop. Then I want some slashes in the top so the steam can get out. I want to do a little paint job with some milk instead of a little glaze. Now that just needs a short time in the oven until the pastry is golden and crisp and the meat mixture is hot again, and it will be divine. It slices so neatly. I'm using a serrated knife, that helps. It's very buttery pastry, nice and crisp, and it goes against this really moist filling. It's one of the best things about it. It's ideal winter food. In fact, it's ideal summer food too. Why not, with the salad on the side? And I have two more great French Canadian dishes, soupe au pois, or split pea soup, and blueberry grumble. My first exposure to French culture was French Canada, and some of the first French recipes I learned were French Canadian too, like Tourtiere, which is a really great traditional one, and this, which is croustade. We call it crumble, and in France, I call it grumble. I have a good story about that. This is a blueberry grumble because blueberries are so Canadian. So this is about 4 cups of blueberries, and I'm just going to add a little sugar. Not too much, because if they're nice and ripe, I want them just to taste like their very little selves. I call it grumble because in France on a menu once I saw it written that way. They didn't know. Crumble, grumble, it sounds the same a bit, so I thought it was so cute. I think I'll add just about a tablespoon of flour because they're so juicy. So I'm just going to spill the fruit into a baking dish. So for the crumble part, butter, universal, and sugar. I'm using brown sugar, and it's more rustic to me. So just cream that together. Now in most English crumble recipes, there's flour in the topping, but I prefer the French way, which is with ground almonds. These are quite finely ground. Sometimes I grind them just a little bit rougher so that you get a bit of crunch in there. I want about 1 cup and a third. Now these are oats, and the French would never use oats. In fact, English recipes don't either. This is a Scottish thing. But I've got Scottish roots, and a Scottish name. In France, you don't see so many blueberries. They have high bush in some places, which they call myrtille, but in Quebec it's bleuet because they have the same blueberries as the rest of North America, only their blueberries speak French. It just needs about 40 minutes in the oven, 400 degrees. It's like a beautiful pie without the effort. have the memory of a sieve for grocery lists. This is the extension of my brain. It's juicy. Ooh. You can't go wrong with this. All that wonderful fruit, very good for you, and then some nice sweet crumbly crunch on top. With oats and almonds makes it very Franco-Scottish. Now here's a real French-Canadian classic, split pea soup, or as the French call it, soupe au pois. I'm using green split peas, you can get yellow too. So what you have to do is soak them in cold water for about an hour and a half until they soften. And then you drain off the water, which gets a bit cloudy. And right into the pot. Just dice an onion or two. Lots of water. Let's take it right over. Now, I'm told that in French Canadian recipes, a pork hock is more popular. So I'm using that. And, almost forgot, a bay leaf. Now this looks like a huge amount of water, but the peas drink it up and it cooks down a lot, so I'm safe. That needs about an hour and a half and then it will be nice and soft. Last ingredient is carrots. So just when I take out the ham bone and shred the meat off it, I'm going to put the carrots in and just leave it long enough for them to be nice and tender. Now just let the carrots cook and put the ham back in, or the hock. Salt. Potage, nice and thick and filling. Smells just like being a kid again. I love it. I love how thick it is and so warming. It's the kind of healthy thing that you get so rarely these days. Next I'm going to make another dessert, very Canadian and very French, a maple mousse. If you're interested in French food, a fun thing to do is to leave France completely and explore the food of French cultures in other places, like Canada. Mousse is a classical French dessert, and adding maple to it makes it French-Canadian. Maple syrup. This has 3 stages. I need egg whites, I need whipped cream, and I need a sabayon full of maple flavor. So first, break an egg. Whites go in the copper bowl for whipping, but then a metal or glass bowl for the yolks because they're going to go over simmering water. And right in with the yolks, I'm adding a bit of sugar, 1/4 cup of brown sugar. And brown sugar has a nice deep taste and it goes well with the maple. So right to the brown sugar and egg yolks, add a lot of maple syrup, 1.25 cups. And I've got a pot with just about, I don't know, 1 centimeter of water in the bottom. I want it simmering and I want the bowl not to touch the water, so you can't fill it up too high. Otherwise you'll cook the eggs too quickly. I mean, this is going to be slow cooking. I want this to get ribbony and then triple in volume. While I'm whisking, I have 2 tablespoons of water in a ramekin. I'm just putting in a spoonful of gelatin to soften. And then I'm going to add it to this mixture afterwards. The eggs cook in the maple syrup and it makes almost like a custard. and then it thickens even more and whips up nice and ribbony. So as soon as the gelatin is softened in the water, whisk it into the egg yolk mixture. I'm just going to let that cool a bit while I whisk everything else. The egg whites. It's just like a mobile phone. You see, when you're not plugged in, you can wander. And now some cream. I want 1.5 cups of cream to whip. Okay, a spoonful of egg whites into the yolk mixture, just to get it more into the same consistency as the cream and the whites. Then just pour that on the cream. And then fold it all together. That bowl's a bit big, so I think I'll just get a slightly smaller one to chill it in. I'll just patiently wait until this is set, and that just needs a few hours in the fridge. It's so airy and mapley. That with just a little cookie on the side would be a perfect ending to a French-Canadian meal. I have one more thing to make. Ploy, which are a little pancake made of buckwheat flour from a very specific region. There's still a lot of really very French food in Canada, and what I love is that you run into traditional dishes here that you almost just see traces of now in France. It's like history is still alive in another place. And you still stumble across some dishes that in fact you hardly even find in France anymore, like ploy. Ploy are actually very peculiar. They're a little pancake, almost like blinis, and they're made with buckwheat, but they're not like the buckwheat galettes you find in Brittany, you know, the really, really thin ones, like sheets of paper, like bath mats, thin, big crepes. These are thicker, and they cook small like this on one side, and you don't flip them over. So first you need buckwheat flour. I've got grocery store buckwheat flour for these, because that's what I found easily. But I've been on the search for a long time for really, really light buckwheat flour. And my mom just told me that she found some in an Acadian village, one of those historical villages where there was an old mill. And so she bought a whole stash of it, and I can't wait to get my hands on it. Just to keep them light, I'm adding 1/2 cup of white flour to the cup of buckwheat flour. I need a teaspoon of salt. And a tablespoon of baking powder. So just stir that together. And to make a batter, 3/4 of a cup of cold water. Now on top of this, I'm adding 1 3/4 cups of boiling water to take this paste to batter. It reacts immediately with the baking powder and goes, starts fluffing. So that's 1 3/4 cups in total of boiling water. So once you have a nice smooth batter, Just let it sit for about half an hour. That relaxes the gluten so you don't end up with tough crepes, tough pancakes. So you need a little drop of oil. The fun part of these is that they get tiny bubbles all over the top, and you're just supposed to wait until all of the bubbles appear and then lift it off. They're nice and crisp on one side and soft on the other side. It's really fun to be trying these French recipes beyond France, because then you find out that there's a whole other French cultures and they might be right next door, waiting to be eaten. I've made tourtiere, a traditional meat pie with a twist, crustade de Blueberry or blueberry crumble, aka grumble, soupe au pois, which is a split pea soup with a pork hock, maple mousse, which is light and airy but very intensely mapley still, and ploy, buckwheat pancakes fried on one side. They're all traditional French tastes, and I just discovered them in my own backyard.